Time.
Yeah. Depends what you call
It takes time. It takes time.
Okay.
We did a ride this morning in memory of my son Ariel Zal. Today, Tesha Shanim, he ended his life, he ended his suffering, and we rode today only 64 minutes. And for a change, I'm not going to talk about watt power or cadence, but if you break down the numbers of the amount of people in the world, 82 billion people in the world, over 725,000 people ended their lives last year by suicide. You do a quick math, which I did already.
How many? 700,000?
Over 725,000 people. Do a quick math per minute. That means in the 64 minutes we just rode, close to 90 people ended their lives by suicide somewhere in the world. That statistic is awful enough. In Israel, the numbers before 2003 were approximately 500 Israelis who ended their lives by suicide, and I can only say approximately.
Per year.
That year, every year, approximately, because of the issues of, and why I talk so much, of shame and stigma and hastara, embarrassment and hiding the numbers, it's only an approximation. We know, though, there were 6,500 attempted suicides in the year 2023 because you arrive in the hospital, it has to be reported. That number also is mind-boggling and disturbing. What's especially disturbing for me, and people who deal with suicide prevention, in that year in 2023, and every loss is a tragedy. I don't have a stranglehold on loss. 65 Israelis were killed in terrorist attacks. 350 Israelis died in car accidents. But over 500 people, Israelis, killed themselves, ended their suffering. But there's an inverse relationship between what the media talks about, what society confronts, and the numbers. Every pigua is horrific, and we know in which machzon, which barrier the terrorist entered, and why wasn't the army there, and why was the government there, and everybody talks 24/7 on every terrorist attack. You get in the car Sunday morning, you know in Kfish Tishim, 90 road, how many young kids had a head-on collision, and the statistics are horrific. But the largest number, 1.5 more than car accidents, is suicides, and no one talks about it. And I get that there's such fear and shame, and it's frightening, and there's a stigma. Universal life, we strive for life. As Jews, the essence of mitzvot is chai behem, to live by them. Those who keep Shabbat, we know there are a myriad of laws, what's permissible and what's not permissible. And the rega shel shniya, the fraction of the second, the moment there's this risk of life, pikuach nefesh tochet kol. Because the essence of life and mitzvot and chayim is the essence of universal life in Judaism. So how could we possibly comprehend the opposite? It's frightening, it's scary, and there's a lot of stigma involved. That's part of the reason of, to quote Hirsch, Zichron Livracha, and Rachel talked about it last week, the why. Part of my why, which has changed over time, which Rachel emphasized, is that I feel it's a shlichut now, because I know issues, I know some mistakes that I made, I know mistakes that the army, the B'riyut HaNefesh, the social welfare system, the mental health system, we missed things, I didn't know things, and I want to talk about that not as a sense of just achet guilt, but what John talked about last week in New York about if October 7th, the starting point is loss, what do we do now to learn from that loss? What mistakes, hafakat lakachim, what are our takeaways? And my starting point as a grieving father is loss. Last year I talked about the blessings and the Dvash the Oketz in reverse order. And I have plenty of blessings. You guys are blessings riding in this cold weather. In the last 9 years, I'm now a Saba to 2 adorable grandchildren, and a third grandchild is on the way, and a beautiful wife and friends and community. but the okets, the thorns deep in my side hurt and they cause bleeding. But I don't want to stay just in the sadness. I don't want to just stay in guilt or anger and frustrations. I want to take that loss and learn from it, so there are less people like me, and there are less people like Ario who felt he just cannot ride through. We have to have compassion for those who can't ride through. So I'll try to do as quickly as possible my 6 takeaways, and these are my 6 takeaways.
5 minutes.
You can
Just
go on.
telling you.
It's not like a WhatsApp. The 6 takeaways are my takeaways. In no way am I speaking as a social worker, even though I was for 30 years. And in no way am I saying this is comprehensive. And if this is a trigger to any parent, I'm not blaming any parents, and I'm not blaming myself. I'm looking at issues and trying to learn from them. The first major issue we talked about, and a lot of this is also based on my training, volunteer training from the Amutah, the NGO, Bishvil Lechaim, the path for life. And already there is an interesting play in words. Bishvil means for, they give services, emotional services, professional services, and also research and prevention and training volunteers how to speak, and Shvil, a path. And in biking, the metaphor of riding through, fits into the Shvil Achim. So they talked about understanding basic definition, clinical definition of depression, of a drastic decrease in mood, but drastic over time, which makes it unable for the person to function, increases sadness, and decreases happiness. So a quick review of my Sipur issue with Ariel, things that now are so clear, but I didn't see then, and I have to say this: the press, B'riyut Nefesh didn't exactly help me see it. But Ariel, from a judo champion and a happy kid, a tough kid, but judo, the height of his excitement of being a champion in judo, suddenly started crying at night, couldn't sleep, started screaming, "Life sucks, I want to die," stopped going to school, barely get out of bed, couldn't function, 5 yichidot, 4 yichidot, 3 yichidot in math. The thing he loved most, judo, he stopped. So when you have the definition, you can see it was so clear. But I never got a clear understanding that's clinical depression. Either the psychologist couldn't explain it, also I was in denial. How could my kid, strong, healthy kid, Ario was a champion, and a healthy, normative family, have a mental illness? Devor immediately saw it. I was in denial. Stigma, me too. So I don't just blame the society, I also did that. So I missed that. What I also missed, and again, all across the board, is just missing how to fix it, not just to blame myself or the psychologist, that a priori, if someone is clinically depressed, there's a greater risk for depression. That is like one of the most important things to remember. That does not mean that every person who is depressed ends their life by suicide, but it means there's greater risk and we have to be more aware. I didn't understand the risk, I wasn't aware. I also didn't understand that the depression goes in waves. So later, when he somehow survived high school, went to Mechina, he flourished in his gap year, made friends finally, he loved the education, he loved the workouts. So I said, aha, see, Dvorah was wrong, I was right. It was just, I know as a wrestler and lacrosse player, the pressure of competitive sports, being on the mat alone, it was hormones, it was teenagers, he's fine. Because I didn't understand that was a wave. Somehow he, like most kids, did the Mechina. He had a great year. And here's the issue of the lesson number 2 about loneliness, and the issue again of stigma and of the embarrassment. In order to get into the army, he had to convince the psychologists and psychiatrists that he was kashir. So he was forced to reduce his medicine in 12th grade and stop the medicine. And because when he wasn't depressed, he was a sharp kid and a great kid. He was always a great kid, but he was depressed. He got into the tough course paramedic, with the army not knowing one single thing, that for 4 years he was depressed, would scream at night, couldn't function, and dropped judo. None of his emotional background, it was all erased. It was one big delete, because if he would have shared that with the army, he would have never got into the course paramedics. like most things in the Army, it's broken up in three. The first part of paramedics, he did really great in the education. He flourished in the hospital. But then was the turning point was that the third part of the paramedics is when you do MADA. How do you say MADA in English? Magen David Adom. Because he was known as such a great soldier, and because the Army didn't know about his emotional background, 1 out of 35 soldiers, only my son, did his stage, the internship with MADA, not in his home base, not in Jerusalem, because there weren't enough ambulances. So he's sent to Tel Aviv. First time in his life, he sees people dying in car accidents or heart attacks and elderly. Was sent to a private room in Modi'in, and all the negative thoughts, all the spiral thoughts, his depression was related to OCD, came back big time, and he was alone. And till this day, I struggle with myself. Where was I? Either I respected his decision to hide the information from the Army, or because, crazy guy, was a 27 volunteered for a year and a half and did 15 years of reserve duty. The Army chisheloti, fortified me. So I maybe thought like, yeah, beseder, he'll tough it out. And I missed that. And I remember way back when at the Spade 9 years ago, I said, why didn't I call up Carmel and Menashe? Why didn't I scream like other parents do and speak to the commanders and get them out of Tel Aviv? The biggest lesson then is that, and there's a great line in the, difficult line, important line in the Matzeget, the PowerPoint, Dikaon mizin b'didut mizina dikaon. The connection of loneliness and depression is deadly. Is deadly. So if you know if someone is clinical depressed all through high school, you can't leave him alone. But he was left alone. So we moved to takeaway number 3 is that he was such an amazing kid that even though, and the Army just threw him out, by the way. The Army, the Army just said, you're depressed now. He was hishtachrer, he was released on the lowest 24 profile, comes home, and still he's such an amazing kid, even when he was not in the depression, said, I still want to volunteer, I want to do Shurut Lumi, national service. He goes to the Miklat Nashim, where he gave his bar mitzvah money years before, and they said to him, you must be out of your mind. This is the place where women have been hurt physically by men. It's the last place in the world where you allow men as a volunteer, where you only allow women. Ari was so smart and so sensitive and so good that he convinced them, and 6 months later, and he amazing relationships with the staff, the parents, the mothers, and 6 months later they were going to hire him after his first year of as a volunteer. And then again, the same patterns of terrible loss of mood, decrease in mood, inability to function, terrible sadness. All the spiral thoughts came back into his head. He couldn't get out of bed. He loved the kids, but he couldn't work at the miklat, and he left the miklat. During that time, I spoke to him, and I said, you've been 10 years in therapy. You've tried, you were amazing with the judo at work, but then you had to leave. The Army, you had to leave. And now you're leaving the miklat. Maybe it's time to try something different than the same psychologists and the same medications that aren't working. His response was, and again, when people say to me, Meir, if someone's nachush, if someone's determined, I'm well aware if someone's determined that they will end their lives. And so here, Aria, you can see his sharp response to my suggestion was that this was either his illness or this was also his personality. He said, Abba, you don't have no idea what you're talking about when you suggest CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. He said, CBT is cognitive and OCD is cognitive. There'll be an explosion in my mind and I'll burn to death. So I thought I was clever and sensitive. I said, I don't think you'll burn to death. Maybe you'll burn your arm and we'll put some cream on you, but just try something different. So here the essence, the background of my background of a social worker. I mentioned to Yehuda that will come back to haunt me on different levels. On this level is because my expertise, supposed expertise and experience was in community work, in Project Renewal and Partnership 2000, connecting needs and resources, Netivot, Negev in Philadelphia. But here I didn't understand and I missed the point that as a father, I may be the worst person to speak to him about suggesting a different treatment. I had so much conflict with him over his depression in high school. And Yossi Belz Levi from Bishvil Chaim, and he deals a lot with suicide prevention, talks about it's a community issue. It's not just psychologist, patient, it's not just father, son. So here, when I miss out, when I try to share now what I learned now, it can help other people, is that he had such great relationships and love and respect of his Judah teachers. I could have spoke to them. He had such amazing friends at his Mechina. I could have spoke to them. The idea is you have to lizahot, identify community resources, bring in the community, and have a community approach in just in terms of father, son, psychologist, patient. So that was a big lesson that I didn't understand then. I got caught up in the dynamic of just me, Ariel, and myself. And if you have a community approach, it can be helpful. Number 4 is the biggest myth I want to debunk, and it's the biggest reason why I write and talk, is that the myth that if you broach the subject with someone, you raise the idea, then they'll think of ending their life. And we all know that it's the isolation and the embarrassment and the shame, and it's a terrible illness. Depression is an illness. You don't bring up ideas. We checked Ariel's phones and his computers. It wasn't like someone just broached the idea and then it was depression. People end their lives because they're suffering. They're in tremendous pain. The quick story, I know some of you have heard of the quick story. He gave me an example connected to coffee. He said, Abba, you just made a decision to have a cup of coffee. You drank your coffee. You enjoyed your coffee. He goes, this is my defuk life. This is my fucked up life. I think about having a cup of coffee, and then I think maybe an hour early I should have had the coffee so it won't affect my sleep. So maybe I'll have decaf coffee. But if I have decaf coffee, it's a chemical process, it's not healthy. I'll have green tea. But green tea also has caffeine will affect my sleeping process. So maybe I'll just forget about the tea and I'll have yogurt. But because of all these ridiculous medicines I keep taking, and the medications half the time help, half the time don't, if I have yogurt, which is supposedly healthy, it will affect my digestive system. He said, every decision in my life, I have 500 spiral negative thoughts that mishotekoti paralyze me, mishogeoti and drive me crazy. And that is why my life sucks. There was another story, but I'll try to make it shorter. I know we're all cold. Also, the importance of the problem with the myth is you need to talk to them. And here's again how the social work comes back to haunt me. I spent hundreds of hours and hundreds of papers teaching social work students how to create an environment of talking, how to reflect in an empathetic, non-judgmental, non-critical way, have a conversation. But I was so petrified of talking about this with my son. I spoke to a psychologist, and he said, well, if you're going to Florida with Devorah, and Ariel asked Devorah not to go, and if you have any kind of concern, speak to him. So again, I can blame the system for not guiding me, but I didn't ask questions, how do I do that? And I was petrified, and maybe someone else should have, in the community, could have asked the question. So I asked a yes or no question. Ariel, you gonna hurt yourself? Notice I still was afraid to use the word suicide. I asked a poorly articulated question, yes or no. He said no. And so I sighed a sigh of relief. That happened the second year. A year and a half later, when Devorah and I were going to the States for Pesach, and Ariel again asked Devorah not to travel. Again, I said, are you going to hurt yourself? And he said, no. So what did I do with so many social work students, and what I could have done with Ariel? And hopefully, if you have friends or family, if you're in the same circumstance, the whole idea is a learning, a takeaway, hafakat lakachim. You don't need to be a social worker to do basic reflections, saying, Ariel, you've been suffering for 10 years. Your ups and downs with the judo and the mechina, and you left the army, and you left the miklat, the shelter. Some people, when they're depressed, contemplate suicide. Do you? Are you? Because if you do, maybe not only Devorah won't travel, I won't travel. And we love you, we're concerned about you, we're not sure how to help you, but we're concerned. That's a conversation that I've had a lot of times in the middle of the night. And some of my cohorts use the word tikkun. I use the word shlichut because I can't litaken et zeh, but I can give up my shlichut that other people out there in the community will do it differently. Basic conversation, which I didn't have. That was lesson 4, a big one. The lesson 5, I talked, the first takeaway was about simanim, signs of depression. Now you have signs of suicidal tendencies. There's a myriad of them on YouTube and Facebook and internet, so I'm only going to tell you what happened with us because this is my story with Ariel. Some classic things with all the ills of Facebook. That was a lifeline for a kid at that age 9 years ago. He closed his account. When I asked him, how come you're not going to Tel Aviv for all the Shabbatons with the Mechina? He said, but they drink there and there's drugs there and it messes up my medicine, so I'm not going to Tel Aviv. I closed my account. I didn't realize closing a Facebook account and closing your WhatsApp account with friends are clear signs of suicide ideation. Even though he stopped judo years ago, he always used to run, he used to do push-ups, he stopped exercising. This was before COVID. Basically, he did bidur atzmi. He did self-isolation, quarantine. He didn't leave the house. He lived on screens, computer screen and his TV screen. That disconnect from society was a sign. Also, again, the issue of the waves, calmness is also going to be a sign. Suddenly he asked Devorah and I to play cards with him at Shabbat morning. We had a football game like we were in teenagers. He asked Abba come throw the football around. This calmness was also a sign which I missed. So total disconnect from society was a sign, and I kind of was happy with the calmness finally. We were talking, we weren't fighting. I got lulled into the sense of calmness, which was a mistake. The last one, there's a sign of optimism, and why again I'm determined to speak, because this megafa, this plague, can be not eradicated, but it can be reduced, is something positive about the army. The importance of 2 things: distancing dangerous objects for someone who's depressed, whether it be guns, whether it be drugs, whether it be ropes, to make sure if someone is alone, and don't let them be alone, don't let them be depressed, and make sure dangerous articles are away from them. So here you talk about lack of awareness. We knew for 2 years, we knew Ariel was depressed, fighting depression and OCD for 9 years, 10 years. The last 2 years of his life, there was a gun in the house every other week, right? Another tank person, Shachar, my other son. We had total lack of awareness of depression. It's higher risk. You don't let them be alone, and you don't let them be near dangerous objects. The details of what happened will not be shared, but the worst tragedy happens. So why is there room for optimism? Because the army, who did nothing for my son 9 years ago, without a new medicine and without a new treatment modality, succeeded in, before 2023, before the October 7th assault, reduced suicides in the army by 54%. 54% without a new medicine and without a new treatment. How? Because when there's awareness, and that's the whole idea of increasing awareness and decreasing stigma, they said that any soldier who's not combat, but has a gun during the week, when he goes home for Shabbat, the gun stays at the base. So at 4 a.m, when he's had his 5th beer on a Friday night and has a big fight with his girlfriend, he has no access to go home and take the gun. And we can be skeptical and cynical and say, but 8 o'clock Sunday morning, he's back at the base with the gun. That's the second piece of this last takeaway, is not only do you have to separate and distance dangerous objects, but if you decrease the time of impulsivity, decrease the impulsivity, shigon rig'i, Sunday at 8 o'clock in the morning, he no longer has a desire to end his life.
Because he sees people, the soldiers and the community.
Exactly, and because he's not drunk
And because
Not
there's
alone,
a time
not
between
alone.
people who take their lives and their suffering, there's a lot of ambivalence. Because again, most people want to live. So if you take that ambivalence and he's 4 a.m. drinking, and there's a great impulsivity to end your life, you distance the object and you distance the time, and there's a greater chance. The same thing has happened in San Francisco. With greater awareness, people started to say enough of these people jumping from the San Francisco Bridge. Simple thing. Sometimes again at 3 a.m. I don't sleep well. You know, in 2 years, Pfizer, we created a vaccination of COVID. Why don't we have better medications? So it's better than 50% of these medications or depression are helping. So without any change in TPOL treatment or any change in medicine, San Francisco municipality simply raised the gate, raised the fence. Less people jumped. And again, you can say, but there are other bridges. But because people feel there's less stigma and less loneliness and less embarrassment, there are less people jumping. There are bridges in London now which have signs and numbers saying, we care about you. If you're thinking about ending your life, please don't. We care about you. Here's the phone number. So if you understand what depression really is and the risks that are involved, and you prevent people from being lonely, and you look at community resources, and you're not afraid to talk about this subject in general or directly to the person and ask them as a conversation, and you understand the signs of suicidal tendencies in your own home, and you keep objects away, I believe there's a way we can reduce this scourge. And that's my why, and that's why I write, and that's why I talk, because I think if we can talk, we can save lives.
Amen.
Thank you,
Amen.
man.
Thank you.
Shkor.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Mayor, I would like
I
to
learned a lot, man.
I would like to carry this forward. The message you gave now, I have to think together with you how I can help get it out there. Other people also. I know that suicide was something that people didn't talk about. That there are more suicides than traffic accidents and piguim together.
So I'm writing, last night I told Tzvi and you, I was doing 3 things at once. A book is going to be published by Stemetsky's in Hebrew, Rochev Kadima. And we're working on a website now in English.
Who's writing the Hebrew?
Google. And Stemetsky's is translating, not me. And I'm working on a website in English. And so hopefully there'll be more, Bishvil HaChaim and the Misrad HaChinuch, the Ministry of Education, and Bishvil HaChaim, there's a lot of good things happening. I spoke to 75 guidance counselors in Ashkelon and 25 in Beersheba. And the Army now is much more open to having people speak about suicide awareness. It's happening, but it's just a terrible disease. And again, my friend ChatGPT, I think in the last decade, $69 billion were invested in cancer research, which is good. Even ChatGPT didn't have a statistic for mental health. And you think about this, in the New York Times article 2 years ago, the honest psychiatrist said 50% of the time they're not sure why medications work. 50% of the time, when it does work, they're not sure why. So I said to the soldiers, because that resonated more with them, would Israeli society, the army, accept that Iron Dome would be successful 50% of the time? So why in the world do we accept that medication works only 50% of the time? Damn it, let's invest more, more research. It is a terrible illness, and I know if someone's determined really suffering in their lives, let's put more money into research. Let's figure it out.